Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of DefDave's 1984. I'm your host, DefDave, and on this show, we're taking a comprehensive chronological journey through what I consider to be the best year ever. And last week, we turned the calendar to January 23rd, where we talked about the release of Bon Jovi's self titled debut album, but we're going to keep the calendar on the 23rd because on this exact same day, something that I don't know, maybe wasn't high profile to the general public that night, but would prove to have an enormous impact on pop culture through the rest of the decade and beyond. This is the day that Hulk Hogan won the WWF World Heavyweight Championship belt from the Iron Sheik, and this is was the beginning of a long reign and would be the catalyst that would open the door and usher in one of the most incredible eras in wrestling history. I was not a wrestling. I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm currently a wrestling fan of what's going on these days, but I was a wrestling fan, a WWF fan during the 80s, and I'm still nostalgic for it. I'll still watch those old matches and those old events online and stuff. But I am not the expert on this. So I reached out and I'm so excited for our guest to join us tonight. This is Karl Stern, also, I believe, known as the Dragon King. Karl, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Doing very good, and thank you very much, for Dave, for having me here. And this is most definitely my sweet spot. I love 1984 and pop culture. I was 13 years old in 1984, so that's where you began getting your, I guess, your feet wet musically, deciding what my parents listen to may not be what I want to hear, and so you're starting to discover music for yourself, popular culture, and of course, wrestling was huge in the popular culture in 1984.
Yeah, so we're the same age. I actually had my 13th birthday the day before on January
Ah,
22nd, Super Bowl Sunday, 1984. So it's good to hear that. I know, so we can speak the same language here because I was very familiar,
absolutely.
especially with what was happening with WWF during this time. So before we go any further, the first thing I want to do is um, give us your credentials. Let folks know how I found you and like what you got. What do you have going on? What do you have out there?
Well, I've been covering classic wrestling. I too am not a current wrestling guy. All of my credentials lie in the really pre 2000 pro wrestling. Um, I have been working for Wrestling Observer for 15, 20 years now, doing the classic wrestling audio show there. And I now do my own stuff at whenitwascool.com, including writing books, which one of those was DragonKing Karl's 1984 and 85 Pro Wrestling Omnibus, which is kind of an almanac type publication giving something for every single day of those 2 years. And needless to say, in those 2 years, it's like a 600-page book because so much stuff happened. And the entire, not only pro wrestling landscape, but popular culture landscape, all changed at really the same time. And it was a very, it was just an incredible era, whether you're talking about TV, movies, music, sports. It was all coming together in a great way right around that time period.
So I'm gonna venture to say. So I'm a Georgia boy. I've lived in Alabama and Tennessee. You sound a little Southern to me. Is that a good guess there?
You're 100% correct. North Alabama is where I'm home, but I'm actually court certified as an expert in pro wrestling in the state of Georgia. And
Okay.
that came about when I was working for the law firm of Meadows, Ictor, and Trigg based in Atlanta, Georgia. And what had happened in the early 2000s, right around the changeover from the 90s to 2000s, a group of minority wrestlers sued WCW and Turner Sports for discrimination. And I was hired by their attorneys to do statistic gathering. if just present the statistics as they are and let the court determine if there had been any sort of discrimination involved. They ended up settling out of court with the group of wrestlers that had sued them, some of which included Ernest the Cat Miller was one, Bobby Walker another. A guy who became a big star in MMA, Brian Sapp was involved, sorry, first I forget his first name, Bob Sapp, was involved in that also. So that's where I actually was certified by a court in the state of Georgia as a pro wrestling expert. So
Well,
I
there you
guess,
go.
ta-da.
So, all right. So we're both the same age. We're both from the South. So I'm pretty confident in saying that at this moment in time, January of '84, the WWF did not have a lot of visibility down in the South.
No.
Were you aware of all that scene, or were you strictly looking at your local scene?
By way only of the newsstand magazines. We did not on television get anything other than our local promotion. I was very lucky actually to live on the border of two, one being Ron Fuller's Southeastern Championship Wrestling, which came out of the Florida Panhandle and the state of Alabama, Dothan Studios. But I was also on the edge up here near the state line, the Tennessee state line of Memphis. And so I got Memphis TV wrestling out of the TV station in Tupelo. So it was a huge, just a huge amount of regional wrestling here. But WWF was something I didn't get to see for a couple years down the road. But because I was such a big fan, I bought all the newsstand magazines. I knew, who Hulk Hogan was. I knew who Iron Sheik was. I knew where they had been wrestling. Probably I really got into wrestling in 1982. So I'd had about a year head start on this. And that was pretty much it. You couldn't be in popular culture and not know about Hulk Hogan because of Rocky III. And it being, a huge success. And there's really no way of today to compare because pop culture is so segmented. Wrestlers appear on shows all the time and nobody even takes note of it. But back then, it was a huge deal. When you only had, 4 to 5 channels on your TV to choose from, anybody on those 4 or 5 channels was a star. And it was a very big deal, Rocky III, and I think it lays the groundwork significantly for what's going to happen in January of 1984.
Yeah. So, so 84 in general, a very significant year in the history of wrestling because before the year is over, Vince McMahon Jr. would take WWF national, and before the year is over, everybody would know about him, and it destroys the old territory system. And there's a lot about the history of wrestling that gets disrupted here. There's the I think was it Black Saturday event in June where he takes over Turner's time slot in the South, and all that's going to come. All right, I'm going to cover all that over the course of my podcast, Carl. Just so you know, I'm dividing my show across 4 seasons. I'm going to dedicate 1 season each to each quarter of the year. So we're not going to get to any of that in season 1 here, but I do want to cover it because this is the year that kind of all that changed, and McMahon Jr. dared to take it national, and he no longer respected that old territory system. But at this moment, at the very beginning of the year, it's still confined to the Northeast, right? He's a Northeast promotion. He's a big one, and I don't even think he's in the NWA, right? He's on his own, but it's huge promotion, and I guess Madison Square Garden is his kind of home base. Is that all that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, he was flirting with the NWA like he was officially a member. If you'll notice, uh, in those everybody always just by default says WWF World Heavyweight Champion. Yet you go back and you watch the tapes, and they never say that. They always say, you imagine in your head Howard Finkel. It's always in the WWF Heavyweight Champion, and that's because they still were technically in the NWA, and by their laws could not promote a world champion over the NWA champion. But they didn't. You would never know that from watching TV. And Vince McMahon was going against, all the promotions, and yet at the same time still keeping keeping his friends close and enemies closer, as you would say, by still dabbling in the NWA. Now, ultimately, they get out of there, but you would never know, and they never used that affiliation for anything really other than dealing with Japan and occasionally getting some talent there. But no, he was definitely, guns blazing, heading on his own path. And cable television is really the mechanism by which he does that.
Yeah, so I think much like barbed wire was spelled the death of the cowboy, cable TV spelled the death of the territorial system of wrestling, and it was just a matter of time before it happened one way or the other. And as it turns out, in our reality, it was Vince McMahon Jr. was the one to do it. If it wasn't him, it was going to be somebody else. I think that's just the nature of cable TV and the way technology was growing and the culture was growing. So yeah, I want to get into this because, I mean, obviously, so Vince has a plan, and he has decided that Hulk Hogan's going to be his champion, and he uses that. He partners with Hogan basically, and we know what comes for the rest of the decade. I mean, it's just so massive. Uh, Penetrates the general pop culture to a degree that had never been done before. So what I want to know first is like, so he hadn't had this company very long. Like his dad, Vince Senior, had this company for a long time, and was someone not, I guess, willing to disrupt the territory system too much. How when did Vince Jr. get control of the company, and and how quickly did he target who he wanted as his champion, and start getting all this stuff rolling?
Well, it's in 1983, and Vince McMahon, well, as we call him, senior. They're not actually junior and senior, but that's everybody understands the elder and the junior. Vince McMahon Senior, the father, uh, was sick. He had cancer, and it was only a matter of time. Now, who ended up in charge of WWF? Maybe there was some question, and there was a lot of, I think, expectation that Gorilla Monsoon, Gino Morello, who had points in the company, may have some uh, influence. There were the older ones there who had been around for a while behind the scenes, but without question, Vince McMahon Jr., Vincent K. McMahon, the son, he had a national vision of wrestling. And as you said correctly, so if it wasn't going to be him, it was going to be somebody. And the NWA actually in Georgia, they had the jump on this with the WTBS and Turner becoming the first superstation. But even USA Network, which came along a little bit thereafter, uh, you had like Southwest Wrestling on there. So it wasn't that nobody before had done nationwide cable TV wrestling. In fact, just the opposite. WTBS, Georgia Championship Wrestling, was very strong. But what Vince McMahon did was he's often used the terminology, oh, I took it out of the smoky arenas and made it, higher class, and that's that's not really exactly accurate. But what he did was take a very gritty, segmented territorial scene and turn it into a national, well polished product, and that went all against the old school. They were, you can't come into my area, you can't talk to my people, so on and so forth. And Vince McMahon Jr. just is like, I don't honor any of that. I'm a businessman, and I'm going to excel at my business. And Hulk Hogan was on his radar even before this. He had been in WWF briefly as a bad guy, as a heel, and but he had really come to his own in the AWA with Rocky III, especially here in the U.S. He was a gigantic star in Japan, and he's there in 1983, late 1983. It's clear Bob Backlund has run his course. He's the backlash against Bob Backlund was significant, and it was time to do something else. And Hulk Hogan just made the most sense. I mean, he was definitely the star on the ascension. There's been other stories that, hey, if it wasn't going to be Hulk Hogan, Vince McMahon Jr. wanted like Kerry Von Erich or somebody like that. But let's make no mistake, Hulk Hogan was his number one choice, and it was good business for Hulk Hogan. It was good business for Vince McMahon Jr. and the WWF. The only person really hurt in this was the AWA, of which Hogan didn't really work there toward the end of '83. He worked primarily for New Japan Pro Wrestling and was allowed to continue to do so even after just days, weeks after winning the WWF championship. He was over in Japan wrestling for New Japan as well. So he was the hottest thing going. And the Hulk Hogan WWF Ascension story is maybe one of the greatest. Just everything in popular culture just worked out at that time. You would have MTV coming on the scene and ascending, and Vince Jr. got involved with that and having them help promote WWF. Uh, the rise of cable television, it was just a perfect storm, and no wonder this worked so well.
Do you think Vince? I mean, I feel like Vince kind of headhunted. Like he didn't care where this guy was. He kind of picked who his guy was going to be and went after him. Number one, is that accurate? Number two, how much does Rocky 3 play a part in that, in him deciding on Hulk Hogan?
I don't know how much. I don't think it had significant impact on Vince Jr. wanting. I think he wanted Hulk Hogan regardless of Rocky 3. But
Okay.
what I do think it matters is to the pop culture, to the general casual audience, it made all the difference in the world. I think even Vince McMahon Jr. underestimated just how strong that movie was. The rise of Mr. T, which was, you remember, you were there too. Mr. T was a gigantic pop culture star. Between the A Team and the movies he did, and just his gimmick of a character, he was all over television, Saturday morning cartoons. He was a big deal, and it just all worked. I mean, would it have worked without Mr. T? Yes. Would it have worked without Rocky 3? Almost certainly. But it just expedited things greatly.
All right. So take us to January 23rd, 1984. Well, first of all, how long had he been back with the company before this title change night?
Not
Do we
very
know?
long. Just to the end of just near the end of 1983, and
And who was was Backlund the champion at that moment, or was it already Sheik?
yes, no, it was already Bob Backlund.
Okay.
This all hinged on Hulk Hogan coming in.
Okay.
So once he was confirmed, locked up, they do this angle where he comes in as the friend of Bob Backlund. And that's why they did a transitional championship with the Iron Sheik. And it's kind of interesting. The Iron Sheik was not the only candidate for that transitional role. So you had essentially two good guys, two baby faces, as they call them in professional wrestling terminology, Hulk Hogan and Bob Backlund. And Bob Backlund, I mean, at this time, his popularity had cratered. He was just no longer working. He had been champion forever, and his last several months were turning fans off tremendously. So Hulk Hogan comes in, and he's kind of like hitches his wagon to the good guy in town, Bob Backlund. But the evil Iron Sheik had just now came into the promotion, and so this is, of course, the early 1980s. It wasn't that far removed from the Iranian hostage crisis, and Iran were the bad guys at that time. I guess people nowadays, you could see how a pop culture company would use world tensions to tell stories. We see it in movies all the
Right.
time and television
Right.
all the time, and wrestling did the same thing. So you had this bad guy Iron Sheik who was come in and beats Bob Backlund, injures his back, and that's important to the story because you got to say, well, doesn't Bob Backlund get his revenge? Doesn't he get to, his chance as the champion? Why rush Hulk? Well, because he was, quote, hurt in storyline. So Hulk Hogan comes in to fight not only for the championship but for the honor of Bob Backlund, I guess, And it was, the match is really nothing special. It was relatively short. It was a cookie cutter by the numbers match, but nobody, zero number of the 26,300 people at Madison Square Garden cared whether that was true or not. They exploded. I mean, it was perfect timing. So now you had Hulk Hogan, who could do this pro-America gimmick, this, all-American guy sort of thing, riding the popularity of, his friends, legitimately friends with people like Sylvester Stallone and other people in Hollywood. And that's a guy you can put on television, on, morning talk shows and stuff, and be the face people are going to recognize. His name, especially, and his personality. And man, it was just the right time. It was, and that's the thing I think about 1984 over and over and over again. You're just going to see it was just the right time. Um, on the toy shelves and the in the toy stores and in the department stores, you had, this is the era of GI Joe is huge, Star Wars is still very popular, Masters of the Universe. And when you look at all those toys, and soon thereafter have Hulk Hogan action figures on the shelf and so forth, that was all very important. It was all very important in the exploding popularity of WWF at this time.
Yeah, I mean, think about what wrestling had always been, right? And it was kind of the smoky arenas and kind of the scary place, and not necessarily for families. Um, you're certainly not marketing your wrestlers to the toy section of the department store. And so to be able to get things to that level, I mean, it changes the whole, or it's symptomatic of the fact that the whole game had been changed, right? It is Vince, with the popularity of Hogan, was able to elevate pro wrestling in the visibility of the general public, not just wrestling fans, to the point where you've got toys, right, in Kmart or whatever, and you've got Saturday morning cartoons. I mean, that. I mean, the leap, the movement of where wrestling was to where they ended up taking it together is really just remarkable. And one of the, probably, I mean, I'm going to venture to say, one of the most significant stories in the history of wrestling. Now, I was going to ask you, where did this take place and how many people? You said it real quick. So this was in Madison Square Garden, the belt change.
Yes, Madison Square Garden. It was on January 23rd, 1984. And it not only sold out the main arena, but the Felt Forum also, where they could put about 6,000 people in there to watch on closed circuit. So in total, it was 26,300 people, which
Okay.
is impressive. That's a big show.
So 26,000 people witnessed this moment live. And like you said, it's kind of a run of the mill match. Didn't last that long, but it was like it had a lot of heat. There was a lot of, it was a great moment. But think about what comes after this moment, right? Because he has one long belt reign, right? And he's through, I guess, basically the next 4 years at least, right? It's in '88, and you get the disruption there at WrestleMania 4 and that primetime main event special. But everything that happens with wrestling and with WWF, WrestleManias, Saturday Night Main Event, the Rock and Wrestling cartoon, the toys in the store, it all had to start with this moment right here of pinning the Sheik, because Vince needed his champion. He found his guy, like you said. He was charismatic, and he could, and he had that strong gimmick, and he just tapped into the times, and
Yeah,
so
and he was looking for something fresh and new too. If you looked around the wrestling world at that time, you would say yes. The NWA World Champion Ric Flair was very charismatic, and would go on to become one of the greatest stars of wrestling ever. But just before this, and would again after this, you had Harley Race. An older looking tough guy, brawler, looks like somebody you wouldn't want to meet in a bar, and just a tough guy. And Bob Backlund, bless his heart, he was so boring and so technical, and had just so ran his course. And then you had the AWA, where Hogan came from, that was just always the top guy was over 50 years old, either Vern Gagne or Nick Bockwinkel. And so there was no new blood. That's why Hogan, I think, gained so much popularity in the AWA, is because, for one thing, he wasn't 50 years old and he was exciting. And with Vince McMahon taking the WWF in a different direction, where it wasn't about, he was never looking to have the best match of the night like Ric Flair in the NWA. He was wanting a exciting pop culture product with, 10 to 15 minute at the longest matches, with people that turn heads at the airport, or you recognize from a cartoon or a movie, or looks like they should be in a movie. And it was, you know, I think we all can understand when I say like the Walmartification of America. That's what kind of WWF did as well. It took all these different nuanced promotions that catered to the older fan, with a lot of times either long technical matches, or in the case of the Deep South, bloody, violent, wild, chaotic matches. And look, there's that stuff's super enjoyable too. I happen to prefer, the old territorial system, but WWF was made specifically for mass consumption,
for the
and they
masses.
did a
Yeah.
great job.
Yeah. Kind of embraced the character gimmicks and kind of, I guess, gave the whole thing a nice sheen. Growing up in the South, it was not a even after everything had blown up and there'd been 2 or 3 WrestleManias. My local area in Georgia didn't embrace the WWF the way they stayed loyal to the WCW, which at the time I called NWA. That was my term for that specific promotion, I guess. But they 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 WCW seemed less concerned with kind of the over the top character gimmicks, and WWF embraced that as a result kind of appealed to the masses, kind of made it look more accessible and family friendly. I'm imagining the crowds got younger, kids are getting into it, right?
Exactly.
So
The NWA was most of their territories, and when people think of NWA in the 80s, they primarily think of Jim Crockett Promotions, which ended up being really in control of things, which was your Mid-Atlantic territory. Or if you're, from around this time period, you're thinking of Georgia Championship Wrestling, because it's what's on WTBS. But it was always more serious. It was always stiffer, more violent, or at least given the appearance of being more violent. It was the wrestlers there seemed like, these were tough guys trying to legitimately beat each other, even
right,
though, it was clear to anybody with 2 eyes that, what was going on here, but it was easy to believe. And suspension of disbelief was not hard to do if you're watching some of this wild stuff, is going on in these Southern NWA promotions. But WWF was very much, real or not, doesn't matter. It's entertaining. This is the I hate to say this because I have no dog in this hunt, but a lot of people would think, like, when you think of Nickelback and rock and roll, or Journey and rock and roll, some people rightfully or wrongfully say, "Oh, that's just
that's not real rock."
simplistic. Yeah, that's not real stuff." And
Right,
so they said the same things about WWF. "Oh, that's their wrestling's fake. Ours is real." And if
right.
you wanted to believe that you could find evidence that,
Yeah,
but
yeah. There was a
it
bigger
was
emphasis on technical stuff. Yeah.
exactly. And
So
WWF very much understood made for TV and made for
yes,
mass consumption.
yes. And so one thing that I've learned about wrestling in the years since is and is exactly how much of a match is improvised, which surprised me. I know they have spots, but in general, I mean, there is to a large degree. I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but they're reading the crowd, and you're getting help, reading the crowd from like the timekeeper and the referee. The wrestlers themselves can be really, really good at it, and it's really an exercise in uh like group psychology and like reading the crowd and giving the crowd what they want. And Hogan was a master of that, right? Hogan was able to read the crowd and like you get those crowd pops, right? And it was all about the pop. And you're talking about appealing to the masses and less worried about the technical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they wanted. Like they wanted to be able to make sure the crowd's popping, the crowd's excited, and they're leaving there realizing they've had a great time. And I think Hogan like was one of the best, right? His matches all kind of followed the same sequence. He'd get beat up for a while, and all of a sudden he starts shaking. He starts shaking his finger, and like it didn't matter how many times he did it. Like the crowd wanted to see that, and it worked every single time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he had his act down for sure. It was an easy act to go. I mean, essentially, all the bad guy heel had to remember is to, at about 10 or 14 minutes in this match, run into this guy's shoe and lay there. I mean, that's the extent of what the match was. But again, it didn't matter. It's no different than, think of your favorite mass produced pop group or pop star or whatever. It doesn't matter how simplistic the song or music is if you're selling 40 million albums. And that's kind of what Hulk Hogan was doing. You can call him the I say this because I know you have some involvement in music, so he's Def Leppard may not be as technical as Rush, but gosh, a lot of people turn out to see Def Leppard. And I happen to love Rush. That's my favorite band. NWA was my favorite wrestling. But I understand why, Journey's packing stadiums, and it's easy to listen to. It doesn't involve a lot of thinking. And Hulk Hogan the same way. You can watch his match, feel good, watch him, beat the monster of the month, and pop along with that, and everybody goes home feeling like they saw, a happy ending. And good for them for figuring it out, because the NWA had exactly the opposite mentality. Their world champion, the guy who was going to close the show most nights, was the bad guy. And they had to overcome, well, how do we get the good guy to look like he wins, but he doesn't really, and send the fan home happy? So we do, some kind of disqualification or count out or reverse the decision. So you had all these complicated NWA finishes that the average, person just flipping through the TV going, what is this? They didn't maybe understand the nuances of that. Whereas WWF is easily consumable. You knew exactly what was happening. If you couldn't figure it out for yourself within the first 30 seconds, the announcers would tell you. And the characters were recognizable, didn't involve too much thinking about. You didn't have to have a big backstory for them. Here they are. This guy's from Iran and he doesn't like the United States, and this guy's a big, guy from the United States who's in movies. There's nothing hard to understand about that.
Right. It's basically a comic book, right? You got
Exactly,
heroes and
yeah.
villains. You're just going for it.
Absolutely.
So let's just step back away from this moment in '84 and look at what it opened the door to, which is everything that came after this. Of course, I'm showing a picture right now from the main event of WrestleMania 3. Packing out the Silverdome there was massive. What really got me hooked was every time that Saturday Night Live was not on the air on Saturday night, you had the Saturday Night Main Event show, and that was the TV show that was like your only chance to see Hulk Hogan unless you're paying for the pay-per-views, because these weren't all just squash matches. You were getting like some good marquee matchups just on free television on Saturday night. Every time Main Event came on, it felt like something special. February of '88, they go prime time. It felt like everybody in the world was a wrestling fan, and he's quite simply Hulk Hogan is a figure that transcended wrestling right, and just became an icon of the decade all on his own.
Oh, absolutely.
So
The WrestleMania.
I'm sorry. I would just let me
No,
say
go
this.
ahead, go ahead.
I'm attempting to describe his pop culture impact, but I want to hand that to you. Like, how? Let's put this in perspective. What is the pop culture impact of Hulk Hogan as the champion?
Very significant. Again, you have to have a it, you have to understand pop culture in 1984 was very different than today. Today, this could never be repeated because there aren't, six TV channels to choose from. There are hundreds of streaming services with thousands of shows on them, and everybody's got their favorite little niche, and everybody's got their favorite video game or whatever. Things were less complicated back in 1984 when a pro wrestler was on a video game, as Hulk Hogan, of course, very soon would be. That was significant. People, our age, 13, 14 years old, that's they would see this, whether they were wrestling fans or not. Who's this character on the video game? What's this video game all about? What is, oh, I remember this Thunder Lips from Rocky 3. Oh, here they are. I love MTV. I'm watching my favorite music videos now. What is this? Roddy Piper and Hulk Hogan on there. In Cyndi Lauper videos with all the wrestling connection there. And Hulk Hogan was, I mean, he was gigantic. He was, for one thing, his entrance song, Survivor's Eye of the Tiger, was tied to Rocky 3. And so he used that as his entrance music. So whenever he would come out, people don't remember this because wrestling music's been in-house produced for so long, but back then they used popular music, and his entrance theme was Eye of the Tiger. And as soon as that hits, who can't help but get up out of their seat,
Yeah.
and everybody knew the song. So
Yes.
you hear it, you immediately pay attention. You say, "Oh, that's the guy that fought Sylvester Stallone in that movie. What's going on here? This doesn't look like a smoke-filled arena." And I know there's a lot. I'm going to catch a lot of flack for saying that because so many wrestling insiders like, "Oh, that statement's not true." I know it's not true, but proverbially speaking, it's there was a difference. There was a definite upgrade between what the territories were doing and looked like versus what WWF was doing and looked like.
Yeah. Basically, we got the first like superstar like that the all the like everybody would know and recognize and like. Uh, and it's like I said in January of '84. He hasn't gone national with it yet. Maybe the general awareness. I don't know. It feels like, I mean, we're just getting started, right? That this moment in '84 where he wins the belt is just a necessary step for everything that Vince has planned, and of course we see it all work out like so enormously. So I I find all of that completely fascinating, and but you basically get our first star, and now wrestling is not just some. It feels like it's not fringe anymore, right?
Exactly.
By 87, 88, 89, it's no longer fringe. It is absolutely in the mainstream. Like I said, the main event was on prime time in February of '88. So that is it to take it from where it was to where it went, and Vince needed his champion to make all that work, and that partnership basically with Hogan. I mean, it just works so well. So I mean, this is it's a fascinating story to me. Um, so Karl, we're gonna wrap this up a little bit. I so appreciate having you on. It's such a pleasure to meet you. I have your podcast bookmarked. I haven't listened to it yet, but I do know that these history books that I've seen that look incredible wealth of knowledge going all the way back to the 1800s. I don't know how you do it, but this is all
Well,
these.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, your first book starts with the pioneer era of wrestling, the earliest like form of it in America in the 1800s, and you take it all the way through, and the amount of information you have packed in there is mind-boggling to me. And I know that you kind of you go over it all in your podcast, right? Kind of starts there.
That's right.
Tell folks
Yes.
more about your podcast.
Okay, everything I do, whether it be book, podcast, or whatever, can be found at whenitwascool.com. My podcast has been running for almost 2 decades at the wrestlingobserver.com website. I've been doing all classic wrestling, so you don't have to listen to my show if you don't follow current wrestling, that's fine. Neither do I. Also, it's family friendly. You can listen to it in front of grandma, not be embarrassed. We don't do silly stuff. It's intellectual talk. It's nerd talk. I'm a wrestling nerd, and I don't care to admit it. And that's what we talk about. It's not really even geared to the WWF crowd we're talking about. It's geared to people who really want to know more. I know the basics, but I'd really like to get a deep dive into it. That's what I do at whenitwascool.com. And just real briefly, you mentioned WrestleMania 3. I have a new book coming out in March that will cover that. It will cover 1986 and 1987. And so I'm very close to getting ready to do the final edit on it. So it will be out in March of 2026, available at Amazon along with my other books as well.
That is awesome. WrestleMania 3 to WrestleMania 4, that is like my prime. That's my prime stuff right there. I love that so much.
Happens.
Yeah. Look, I'm over the course of my 4 seasons of this show, I want to have you back because there's a lot of stuff I want to cover in the world of wrestling. You've got Black Saturday where Vince kind of takes over that time slot on TV and kind of blows everything up and goes national. We have the stuff on MTV, right? This is the year before the first WrestleMania, but you get that rock and wrestling event on MTV. There's all this Cyndi Lauper connection going on. All this is in 84. There's a Starrcade in 84. We have, is it David Schultz who beats up the ABC reporter on TV at the end of the year, right? Macho Man gets married before the year's over.
That's right.
I want to, in time, as I'm going through the calendar, over the course of these next 4 years, I want to cover all that. So I'm very, very thrilled to have met you, and I look forward to having you back. And you said it's called whenitwascool.com.
That's right. Whenitwascool.com.
All right, sir. Let me get you out of here, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this episode of DefDave's 1984. Join us next week as we flip the calendar just one day to January 24th, because this incredible stretch of episodes is not over yet. We're going to go to the comic book store, and we're going to pick up the first issue of one of the most influential limited series that Marvel would ever publish. So to all the Hulkamaniacs out there, say your prayers and take your vitamins, because what are you going to do when DefDave's 1984 rolls all over you?